Okay, so this is second build working group meeting. It's just myself and Johan today. Two Australians, so we're just going to run through some stuff and maybe set up for things we can deal with at the next meeting we have, which we will time better for other parts of the world. So I posted, where is it now? I posted an issue in the build repo. Issue number 77 in the build repo is the state of the build, io.js, April 2015. And it's got a state of all of the resources that we're managing and how they're being used and who's doing what. So I'll just quickly walk through that. Johan, just let me know, just point anything out as I talk, anything for discussion. But we have most of our resources are run in DigitalOcean, but that's all Linux machines. That includes, what have I listed here? 4, 6, 12, 14 servers for test and build. Plus we've got io.js.org is being hosted there as well. Then in Rackspace we're doing all our Windows, where we have 7 servers, 6 of which are actually being used for test and build. One of them is not hooked up to CI because it's Visual Studio 2015, which is not released yet. So I did have that in there for a little while just to test it, but it's currently removed from the CI set. Voxer, who have got a 32-bit and a 64-bit FreeBSD server each for us. So we've got two FreeBSD servers there. And 2 Mac Minis which are running VMs for test and build. So Vox's resources are VPN access, which Johan and I have access to. And Johan's, I think it's okay to say that you're primarily responsible for administering the FreeBSD machines, isn't it? Because
there are actually jails as well. I guess it might be good to mention. So it's not bare bones.
Well, it is bare bones, but they're jails on bare bones.
Oh, okay. Well, close enough.
They're not VMs anyway. But yeah, they're quite quick and good machines. So that's good.
Yeah, indeed.
Joint have given us some zones as well. So we're running 64 and 32-bit tests on them. But as you pointed out, that I probably need to clarify, they're both 64-bit machines.
Yep.
But we're just reusing them in that way. There's been no movement towards doing Solaris or SmartOS release builds. Nobody's actually asked for that. I think Wyatt might have wanted that, but he hasn't actually requested it specifically. So until we get a request for that, I think we'll just stick with tests and not releases. Yep. Scaleway, formerly Online Labs, they have given us an account with 5 free instances. Actually, they're 5 free servers. They're not instances because they're bare bones v7 machines, and we're using 3 so far. 2 of which are regularly in CI. The other one is we'll need to do the release builds for ARM v7. That's still to be hooked up, and there's a lot of people asking for better ARM v7 builds because of the way we're doing it now is on Ubuntu 14.04, and the libc is too new. So we need to get the releases out of this machine for ARM v7. I don't know if that will solve the problem that people have with BeagleBone Black, though. It may do, but I need to test that when we finally get there. Lenaro, that's the group that ARM has set up, or helped set up for helping open source projects adapt to new ARM architectures. We're using that for ARM v8. We have one machine there, which is a quick little X-Gene Mustang from APM that's running Ubuntu 14.04. It's behind a jump host, so it's awkward to get in, but I have done SSH tunnels to make it easier for others to get in the past, just on a one-off. But that's yeah. So I need to. I'm still working with discussing possibilities of more hardware, different variations, but that's an evolving story. The whole ARM v8 thing. Node source behind me there is we've got Raspberry Pis, so we've got 2 version 1 Raspberry Pis. We've got version 1 plus. Those three together are running the ARM v6 CI group. The Raspberry Pi version 2 is ARM v7, but it's running separately in CI because it's running Wheezy, Raspbian Wheezy, which is essentially a different platform. And you know, it's cool. It's good to have that as a separate target anyway. I did have someone contact me today and they have ordered a second Pi version 2 for this cluster, so that's being sent to me, and I'll update this when I get that and make sure that that person is acknowledged. There's an ARM v7 Droid XU3, great little machine that does the currently the release builds for ARM v7, but it's Ubuntu 14.04, which is just a bit too new for release builds. There's also a bigger bone black that I have that's just not hooked up. io.js.org is running on DigitalOcean, and there's lots of different access restrictions in the way that it works with regard to staging and dist and the website build. That's all documented in that thing. Jenkins is also running on DigitalOcean. Not too much to say about that. Automation, I just mentioned how we started doing some automation of GitHub pushes, GitHub pull requests. Scripted setup, so we've got a lot of Ansible scripts in there, and there's a few more that are lingering in pull requests and branches. I've got at least one in a local branch I haven't pushed for the Raspberry Pis. So we're still, what's in the build repo doesn't quite represent the current state of how things are in the wild, but it's getting there. I posted some activity summaries. The biggest, I think, the two takeaways from that are that we really do need to put our foot down on sorting out an HA strategy for io.js.org, and that means also figuring out what we do with nightlies. So there's that discussion about, do we delete old nightlies? I think that's an open question that we can discuss here, and we can probably continue on GitHub. Having HA so we have multiple servers, or pushing it to a CDN of some kind, or just using S3 for release tables, those kinds of things, I think we need to sort out, because what we've got now isn't really scalable. The other thing that's comes up here is that we're not actually tracking traffic on io.js very well, so we probably need to think about getting the website team to put in Google Analytics or something in there, because that would be interesting to track over time to compare to what we've got. So yeah, anything that comes up from that you want to comment on, Johan?
I guess not in terms of like your exhaustive list, rather a few things I think we should start talking about, I guess. The first question I have is all the problems we're having with, or problems, but the limitations of ARM builds, especially like glibc versions. Do you know if there's a lowest supported version of glibc for V8 we need to kind of respect?
I don't know that.
Because I feel like the lowest possible could be a good starting point for us to have as a builder for those build bots.
The lowest that I'm aware of is whatever's running with CentOS 5.
Okay.
Because that's the lowest that we can build on. I'm pretty sure that V8 would go lower, but there's just no reason to.
No. It's just, I guess, because the only drawbacks are most often, performance related. But it just solves so many problems for people that just wants to download something and have it work.
Yeah. So okay, just quick Google says that glibc 2.5 is what CentOS 5 comes with.
Oh, that's slow. Okay.
It is. Yes. So the ARM stuff. The state of that the ARM v7 is what we have to care about, because ARM v6 is pretty much taken care of. The Raspberry Pi builds are fine for people. I haven't had any complaints about them. It's the ARM v7 ones, and it's all because we're doing it on Ubuntu 14.04. So they don't work on some platforms, including, I think, the Raspberry Pi. Yeah, no, it wouldn't work on the Raspberry Pi ARM v7, although people are using the ARM v6 builds for that. The interesting one is, well, no, there's two things here. So Debian Wheezy is probably the best version that we can choose to make release builds on, because it's quite old, and I mean, Wheezy is really hard to get GCC 4.8 running on, but and I can't remember exactly what I did, but I've got it in Ansible scripts actually. The machines we've got running on Scaleway are doing Wheezy with GCC 4.8. So they're working. So that if we make release builds on there, then we get an older glibc that should work for most people on ARM. The only interesting case that I'm aware of beyond that is the BeagleBone Black, which comes with some custom BeagleBone version of Linux that I've never seen but I've heard of. I've had discussions in the repo with people about it, and it's a fork of some ancient version of something. So that's the only thing that I have, and that's why I was given a BeagleBone Black to play with, because apparently I can just stick I have to get a memory card for it and stick their download version of the operating system on it. So that's the state of that.
If it's available online, we can probably just throw in a VM somewhere and just check the libraries. I guess another option would be exploring the fully static flag that was just passed on to the io.js configure, which should embed parts of the libc, if I understand correctly. So that could be an option. I mean, it'll grow the binary size considerably, but if people just want it working, it's at least something we could look at.
It's true.
It still sounds that like setting up a WC release bot would be the preferable choice here.
Yeah, and we're pretty much ready to go. The machine is running, so it's a matter of reconfiguring Jenkins to use it. And it's just it's not something I've just jumped at because it's disruptive and I'm anticipating some breakage. So I need to do it as part of a nightly release just to make sure that it's going, or perhaps I should do it I should do a test, maybe, like a test. So you have two v7 release binaries coming into a nightly directory, perhaps, and ask people to test that.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we move on to next?
Yeah, let me just take some notes of this.
So another thing I had on my list was that, like in some cases, say SmartOS or FreeBSD, it's hard, especially with these issues we've been having with Jenkins and timeouts on, for instance, the Windows machines, and some like semi-related problems on other hardware. I think we should start thinking about a way to temporarily give access to some of the collaborators in io.js to these machines, like on a time slot or whatever. I don't know how, but it would certainly improve the quality of testing once we have these similar issues.
Sorry, are we focusing on Windows here, or are we talking in general?
I mean, not perhaps in general because Linux is so readily available, but the hardware that's not as available, and I guess Windows is one of those environments that not too many developers of io.js actually runs. I mean, I guess the thing we're doing to mitigate it is that we've started doing teams. The FreeBSD team and the Illumos or SmartOS team. But I still feel like those bugs we've been having has just been laying around for way too long, and we need to, for us that have access to this infrastructure, we need to find a way of making it easier for people to try to reproduce these tests.
That's a good idea. So there's two thoughts I have about that. One of them is that one of the big problems we have is that there's so few people that care about or can do Windows stuff. So there's Bert, but Bert's too busy really to get stuck into some of these things. And then there's someone else on the collaborative team that's using Windows. Aside from that, there's not really much Windows interest on the team. But maybe there would be if they had access. So we can give them access to the build machines. Like, it's just a matter of giving a password to people that we trust on the collaborators team. I'm not hugely concerned about that as long as we don't give out access to the release machines. Because the build machines are, they're just building and testing. It's not a huge security concern. As long as they don't touch the release machines, it's fine. The other thing is that we can actually, maybe the easiest way to deal with this is to make a disk image on Rackspace with the whole thing set up.
Yeah, that would be good.
Dev environment, so that we can just spin it up for people individually and say, here's your machine and your password. Log into that and do your git clone and build from there. But because the biggest hassle for Windows is actually the initial setup part, which is installing MSVC, Python, Java. No, actually, you don't need Java for that. Git. Just that whole initial thing is a pain in the backside. So I haven't touched disk images on or boot images on Rackspace, but apparently that's possible with Windows.
Perhaps it's possible to just do a clone of the existing one and do some minor changes to that one, and then just have it stored as an image. I don't know how that works. But
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a really good way. I mean, I just, some of the problems I had during like SmartOS and the FreeBSD testing, I couldn't even reproduce on my local VMs. There's always some version that's different of something, and that's just why it's so good to be able to access the exact same environment as the Jenkins bots.
Do you think we need a more formal procedure here, like document it somewhere in the io.js repo that says if collaborators need access to build resources, they should contact us? Or because maybe
in terms of access, I think I prefer trust as you, but in terms of perhaps them not knowing that it's available for them to use, that could definitely benefit from some kind of documentation. And perhaps mention somewhere, where a lot of io.js collaborators regularly hangs out, And especially if you have that image available in Windows, because I think Windows would be the #1 platform we care about in terms of temporary access.
I have in the past spun up machines on DigitalOcean for people, because you can do FreeBSD on DigitalOcean now. So I've had at least one FreeBSD request, which I was able to deal with on DigitalOcean. The ARM v8 I have done a few times with SSH tunnels, because getting access to ARM v8 hardware is really hard. Even the development boards they're just hard to get a hold of. So that's a precious resource, and so I've been happy to hand out SSH access to that to trusted people. But actually formalizing that and saying if you need access to some of these things, go through these channels and we'll just file an issue or find us an IRC or whatever, and we'll first of all assess whether we can do it. So if there's some resource where it's just we can't, I'd be wary about handing out access to the FreeBSD machines beyond those who have been authorized by Voxer to get into their VPN. Yeah. But we could spin up FreeBSD machines for them on DigitalOcean. The Raspberry Pi and stuff that's happening in my office, I'm a little bit wary about giving full access to people into my network, but it depends on trust. And then Windows should be easier. I think we should definitely investigate the image thing for Windows.
Well, let's just document something generic about access and have them contact us. And I mean, as a first step, we look at doing the Windows image thing, and then if other requests for specific hardware comes up, let's just look at solving it on a request basis.
Yeah. Where should we document that?
Preferably, we kind of want it as part of the collaborators guide in io.js, I think.
Collaborators, of course. Yeah.
Because it's about testing quality.
Yep. Do you want to take that action item, or do you want to leave that with me?
No, I can do it. No problem.
Cool. Okay. So if you want to start some wording for that, I can comment as well. I will look at the disk image situation on Rackspace because I've been meaning to poke around with that for a while.
Okay. You're talking about the io.js nightly situation now.
No,
that's on DigitalOcean.
No, this is for Windows. Sorry, the Windows machine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of that same story.
Okay. Sorry.
So putting your name on that. For Windows. Yeah, no, I like that because getting those timeouts sorted out for Windows would be just amazing to have full passes.
Yep.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day, just about there was TJ from Joyent Node talking about how they were getting towards full passing builds before releases, and which is great because that repo hasn't been in great shape for tests. But I think we've already leapfrogged from where they're at. We've fixed even more tests. Because one of the things they've done is actually taken a bunch of labeled a bunch of tests flaky, and
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we haven't done that, but we've fixed a bunch of tests. We've added new hardware, like all the ARM infrastructure is completely new, and it's amazing what people have done. The collaborators have done to get that working. So getting the Windows things fixed would be fantastic.
Yeah. Exactly. Especially the flakiness is something I don't think is a good solution because we're just hiding it under the rug. I think it's part of the discussion we're having, talking about the potential merger in terms of like only being able to release when you have a full green or blue environment in Jenkins. And
yeah.
I think that flakiness wouldn't really solve that because our release should be concerned about the quality and not just we don't know how to solve this at the moment.
Yeah, at the moment when I'm doing releases and I do the a final CI run just before, and I get Windows timeouts, I have to go in and actually I have to figure out which ones are the ones that we expect to be failing, and even then it's a sad situation because I can't tell whether the failures are, I don't think any of us know whether the failures are something systemic or there's just a glitch in the particular environment.
Yeah.
So
or there related to how Jenkins wants it. Yeah.
It could be something very deep about libuv perhaps that we just are not aware of.
That's actually another question we, at least as a build team, should think about. Like, how much do we care about the shape of libuv? Because if you look at the Jenkins output, it's a pretty red environment. Yeah. And it's just something that's just so deeply integrated in our environment. And I mean, if you look at what Node.js have started talking about, they want to run the V8 tests on their build farm as well, just to make sure that passes. I'm not saying that's something we should do. I think there's a scope for everything, and those tests we need to trust their build bots with. But I think UV could be one of the libraries we care more about.
It is. We do care about it, and I have been thinking about this as well. The path forward, I think, for that is that this automated build stuff that I've been working on, getting that feedback directly into pull requests is going to be key here because it's going to start making everyone care about it. And if we hook that up for libuv, and they start getting all of the failures that they're getting for every pull request, yeah. I think it will spur action. Because I think part of it is just the lack of visibility into what's actually failing, and maybe their CI set is too big for now. Maybe they need to start smaller. But we should have that discussion with them, and I think Ben's probably the first person to start with for that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I've been somewhat involved in libuv, not really to the same degree as io.js, but every time I find test failing on different infrastructure or operating systems, I try to post it, and their general stance so far has been that they're not in a position to. For instance, if I find 10 failing tests on OpenBSD or FreeBSD, they say that they don't have really the time to do anything about it. But if anyone steps up, they'll obviously review and merge. So I understand their point of view. It's a library that's just kind of supposed to interact with so many different really low-level interfaces, and it's a hard task to uphold. But yeah, I think visibility is something that's key in all regards, and something if we could hand it to them, that's something that definitely will improve it.
Yep. I'm just making notes of this libuv.
Yep.
Great. No, and I think libuv we need to care much more deeply about, because I think built within the Node and io.js test suite is the assumption that those things that libuv is taken care of are taken care of. So let's just put that aside. And the fact that a lot of them just aren't taken care of is a concern. And we've had some bugs come up in io.js where it is clearly the fault of libuv, and they may have been picked up if the tests were a bit more active. But they're actually, I think they're a fairly under-resourced team, and it's not such a sexy project like io.js. So yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for the difficulty that they have with that.
I think one strategy also is something I'm trying to do with io.js in general, to move closer to packagers, for ports or NetSource or whatever packaging managers that we have out there, because they are usually the first ones to pick up issues with test suites or build failures. And they most often, I've found a few patches in FreeBSD I backported to io.js and probably similarly to UV. So, having a discussion with them is probably something that just is very beneficial.
Yep. Then it's an interesting topic, whole packages thing. I come from a position of being pretty jaded about that. Just because of the staleness that they are okay with in a lot of situations, particularly Debian. That's just frustrating. So watching that and wanting to distance what we do from that is where I come from. But I appreciate your point of view on this. Moving closer to them is probably worthwhile. So that brings to another topic, which is the scope of our work in the build project, which you raised before, and you've been doing a lot of work on the configure script for io.js, and I'm wondering whether we need to sort of explicitly write in our working group docs that is an area that we are concerned about, that we sort of take responsibility for that, because so far it's pretty much been you and Ben that have contributed to the configure script in recent times anyway. Who you're both on the build team anyway, so maybe we should just explicitly carve that out and say this is something we care about and we will contribute to and we will take some responsibility for in negotiation with io.js collaborators, in a similar way to how the streams working group is taking responsibility for the stream stuff in core.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea, especially if we have more people on the build team that steps up and are engaged about it. And I think like us as a team can also provide so much more in terms of the automation or the how we build different permutations on the slaves to find errors within this, because I feel that's an area that I see lacking, and that's why I spend time on build environment. But yeah, I think that's a good point, and we should definitely do that.
So I'm going to so I'm just sorry, I'm just writing these documents here. The action item for the state of libv thing is that I think the action item that I can see most clearly is for me to continue work on the automation of pull request testing and feedback. Do you want to add anything for yourself there, or do you think it's sort of a little bit hopeless?
No, I think that's a good first step. I mean, obviously we can talk to Ben and what's his name, Saghul? Samuel. So
Saul.
okay, yeah, just talk to them and say that, hey, we have these things in mind. But yeah, other than that, that visibility is probably key as an opener.
Yep. And the other action, so the next one is the scope of responsibility. Action item for me is to build working group docs to explicitly state that we take responsibility for build resources in io.js. And I might also. This will probably be a matter of changing, doing a pull request against the io.js repo to change the working groups doc,
Okay.
and to explicitly say that. So it might be good to call that out there as well. I'll start with an issue on our repo. So scope of responsibility, you were also talking about permutations.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to bring up again. Yeah. So like we have a history of allowing io.js and I mean Node.js as to build against a shared representation of the bundle libraries, which I think is a good thing. I understand the opposite position. I think io.js and Node.js, as carrying this legacy, needs to uphold that it's working well. I mean, C Aries, for instance, was broken for quite a while and it wasn't picked up. I just stumbled over it. And we've also done a similar thing with, how we roll back, for instance, HTTP parser. From a shared library point of view, that's it's usually like a big no-no. And for instance, our test suites in io.js doesn't really take into consideration that there might be a different shared library version out there. For instance, classic example would be a bunch of failing tests in our io.js suite as a result of the user running a newer OpenSSL, and we're not really testing against that. I'm not saying it's a specific build problem, but I think what we can do within this working group is at least start upholding the quality of the shared build. I did a minor mess up in a previous commit a few days ago, which I've sent a PR to fix now, but it's a good example of something that we could have picked up if we just had a build bot. Not necessarily, something that needs to be full blue on a release or whatever, how we define that, but there's definitely something there that we should care about.
Maybe it's so. The problem with adding too many permutations and things to the CI set that we have now is that it increases the overhead for getting feedback to people who are contributing code. I'm just wondering whether one way to solve that is to have two sets where one is used for pull requests and branches and contributions in, and the other one is used for against the master or whatever the current branch is. So whenever something is merged into the current branch, that's run, and then that feedback is given in maybe a badge on the README or something. So that can be much more comprehensive, and maybe that can even include some performance tests, or it can include the pummel tests, something more extensive, and we can get regular feedback on that. So if something is going to obviously break building, you'll know that in the pull request, but then if you are going to break something that's a bit more complex, like shared builds, you would know that once you merged. But then the person who's responsible for releasing the next release would then at least be able to have that feedback from the master. So that you know not to release.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I guess we shouldn't venture too far into the the software you're looking at in terms of automating pull requests and such. But that's kind of one thing I've had in mind with this middle tier that just takes the ping from GitHub whenever a PR occurs, and then kind of delegates into different tasks. Because then we could just easily split up our build slaves into groups and just say, you know, on a PR within a collaborator or a release PR, we could just focus on these tests, and on just a generic PR or something related to build, we could, for instance, focus on a bigger slew of tests, or set of tests rather. So there's definitely something we should do with splitting up which bots and which tests we should involve in different scopes. But I mean, if we're talking permutations here, I think the two permutations we should care about is testing internationalization, because we don't do it at all. It's just one extra test, but just building it, we need to make sure it works. I don't think we have to do the download thing. It just wastes time. But if we just have a library or even have the full system ICU test, that would probably be a good start. And then the other one is probably full shared. So OpenSSL, libuv, HTTP parser, and sedlib.
So tell me about the justification for having HTTP parser as a separate thing, because is anyone else actually using that? And why should it not be bundled in with Node or io.js?
I don't think HTTP parser is different than any other library in that regard. If you have multiple users of a library, there's really no point in not having it shared. It's a philosophy thing, I guess, and I come from a history of a very shared, environment. So whenever you can share libraries, you do it. And I guess coming from Debian, where you're stuck with like a very old base, and then whenever you need to progress from there, you need to start looking at baking stuff in. I guess it's two different ways of looking at it. But I try to look at it from a point of view that we've already offered this in the past, and there's no real cost, I guess, in a sense, because if HTTP parser breaks, it doesn't just break in a shared environment, it will also break in our bundle environment. So we already have it in there, and there's no real reason for us to remove it, unless we start doing something we did with C-Aries, where we, diverge from upstream. But I don't see that happening, since we pretty much are upstream for HTTP parser as well, or we, as in a lot of collaborators from io.js at least. So just to sum it up, I don't think HTTP parser is different from UV or sedlib in that regard.
It's just like, to me, HTTP, but I don't even know who else is consuming that in a way that would make sense for bundling. But perhaps. Oh yeah,
well, a few. I can mention a few, like a lot of Python libraries, Ruby libraries, other libraries that just wants a quick HTTP parser. I think it starts off in a very similar way UV did, where UV was like a minimal set of problems you need to solve in a like cross operating system environment, and then you just start seeing a lot of consumers from like a library standpoint, Python or Ruby or whatever it might be, and HTTP parser is pretty much similar in that regard.
Okay, so tell me how you would do this then. Would you have a list of versions that you would want to test against, and then just run through those permutations?
I would probably just have a host which have an OpenSSL installed, and I mean that's already done. Sedlib installed, that's already done. So it would just have to install libuv and HTTP parser as a shared library, and then just link against it.
Okay, but do we care about different versions though, like different versions of libuv? Because that's the real problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean that's not really the problem of like our working group in a sense. It's the problem of that io.js is very centric in terms of what version it does expect. But for now, just using the current bundled versions would be the simplest way. And I mean that's if I look at how other packagers bundles or builds io.js, that's exactly what they do. So for instance, when we bump OpenSSL to 102, they will also raise their dependency chain to require 102.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. So this
I guess
start off simple just by using what's out there, and then
I mean libuv and HTTP parser might already be packaged for the distribution we're choosing to use for as a build slave. So let's just install them and then link against them.
libuv 0.10 is on my Ubuntu machine.
Okay, that's old.
Well, that's an old version of libuv. I don't know what's on the current. Actually, no, I've got a current. This is Ubuntu 15.04, which is not even released yet. So this is one of my frustrations with distros is the how far they are behind. So here's an idea. Then we could actually use we could use Docker to simplify this, because Docker you can use a whole lot of different base OSs. Base distros, sorry, and you can run all these permutations in it. So without having to worry about the host machine and having to have lots of different host machines, have a single host machine, and then just put these shared things into individual Docker containers, and then run through whatever permutations you like.
Sure. I can create an image that just contains the versions we bundle. I mean, it's not like we update too often anyway.
No. So do you think we need to care about, this is a side question, but tangential question, we're going to go to OpenSSL 1.0.2 soon. Do we need to care? Oh, it is, okay. So, but do we need to care about maintaining 1.0.1 support as well in io.js? Like, should we test against that because of bundling?
I don't think so. Moving forward, I mean, like, I know Fedor is very keen on using a few new things available in 102, so that should just be an expected bump in terms of dependencies. What we could do, I mean, I have a PR in io.js now that leans even further on package config for checking, like getting header include paths or libraries that are required for that package to build. So what we could do is actually have a version check there as well. So the package config would also check the version for the required shared library, because we don't do that at the moment. We just assume that you know what library you're linking to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, look, I actually have a hard stop. I need to finish because I've got to take kids to something. So, is there anything else you want to cover before we tie this up?
Let me just have a look. I guess the only thing, if we're talking about what I want to see done, I really think we should try and land issue 49, which is the updating the README and Markdown file for the new working group of io.js.
49, was it 49?
Yeah.
So I think I just had comments in there about changing language, but I don't know if Will's changed that already.
Yeah, because of the Docker split, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I'd really like to flag as well, which I think is good to get in here, is that the Docker subgroup has been talking about doing releases based on Alpine Linux. And I've tried to, because I think there is some like tangible trust between us that needs to be upheld if they are to represent the release of Docker images. And I guess I've at least flagged that if they want to use Alpine because it's so much smaller, that's great. But we need to make sure that the tests we expect to pass for my release process also needs to pass for them. So there should be some kind of linking of trust, because they will represent a release of io.js. And I mean, we already have William in both groups, and I had a few chats with him about this, so I'm very comfortable.
I'd never heard of Alpine. I've never heard of the Alpine Linux. I saw that issue. I haven't read it though, but yeah. Okay, good point. I better go. I really have to run.
Cool.
That's great news. Well, we'll try and organise another one that is a different time of day to have the others involved. But
sure.
Thanks for coming along. Okay.
Cool. Keep in touch.